Greetings, beloved Star Child Rising. You are in Christina's Corner, and I am Christina. Welcome back to the podcast, where I've said from the beginning that this show is all about love and healing, and where I have the opportunity and the honor to highlight and celebrate individuals who are out here using their gifts and talents to uplift the world. And tonight's no different. Today, we're delving into the heart of storytelling and the power of personal transformation with a truly inspiring guest, author Terri D. Terri's journey is a testament to the power of writing as a tool for self discovery and connection. From childhood diaries to impactful novels and life coaching, Terri has dedicated her life to helping others navigate their own journeys. She's the author of the beloved Tony series, including Yesterday's Lies and the recent collaboration Love, Lies, and Fight with Julie Bellatrix. Beyond fiction, Terri shares her own experiences in love lessons, offering invaluable insights into love and relationships. She's also the founder of a nonprofit called A Blessing for You, supporting expectant mothers in need. And she's also, if that isn't enough, a certified life coach using guided journals to help clients connect the dots in their lives. Terri's work is a beautiful blend of storytelling, healing, and community engagement. Welcome, my friend, Terry D.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for that wonderful introduction.
I'm just so happy to see you. It's been a while.
I
I know we keep
know.
in touch, but it's always good to see each other.
Yes,
And I
it
can't
is.
wait till we're able to do that in person
I
again.
know. I know.
So, Terry, in this podcast, I always have six questions.
hmm
And so, the beginning, we always start off at the beginning. So,
Okay.
you mentioned that writing has always been a constant in your life, and you started with childhood diaries.
Yes.
Can you take us back to those early days? Like, what were you like as a child, and
Oh my
how did you
goodness.
go from writing diaries to, your personal reflection for crafting compelling narratives like your Tony series? How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. It I didn't plan it that way. But starting back with my childhood, I was an only child. I grew up as an only child until I was in my late teens, and then my mother remarried, and I have some siblings now. But growing up as an only child, you have a lot of time to reflect. You're by yourself, a lot. And I've always enjoyed writing, and I've always had a lot to say. I've always been a thinker. So I think those diaries, when you're a little girl, it's Dear Diary. I think those diaries were a way for me to express myself. My mom was a single mom, so she was busy. She worked a lot of long hours. So I remember there being times when, I'm at work with mom. If she had to work late, she'd bring me in, or she's doing things at home. And, so I want to sit at the table and I want to do work too. I want to seem like I'm doing something important. So I just start writing. Um, but I think it was really, it's as a, I mean, 10, I'll say as young as 10, I can remember just writing about how I felt about things, or how something at school may have affected me, or, going back to, you know, when I was 10, I think I was 10, yeah, getting my period and my first period, and how I didn't tell my mom about that like all day, but I wrote in my diary about
Ah.
it, what is this and how I felt and everything. So it was always been a way for me to kind of express how I feel. And
It's interesting. I had forgotten that you were an only child. I know a lot of people who are
yeah,
only children, and the imagination that
hmm
comes about and the innovation of
yes.
the only children is very present. So thank you
hmm
for sharing that.
So from that, and writing became something, in junior high, high school, I was a part of the school paper and, an editor. And so it wasn't planned. I've always been an avid reader, but, journaling's always been something that I've done throughout all the phases of my life. And how I ended up later in life writing my first book, the Tony series You Missed Yesterday's Lies, was, I happened to be off work. I had had a medical procedure done and I was out for 6 weeks. And I was reading a story one day and just this story just came to me. And I sat down at the computer and I just started typing. And that first night I stayed up all night. I did. I was up all night until, early in the morning. And at the end of that first session, I had a story, I thought. I don't know how many pages it was, but I remember sharing it with my cousin who is um my biggest fan, but also she can be very critical, but she's my biggest fan. And so I, sent it to her and I said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And she read it and she said, "I love it, but now you got to finish it. This is just the beginning." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "Well, it's a
Mm,
great the beginning of something great. I'm gonna need you to, finish it." So that's how I kind of went from, like you said, the Dear Diary into my first book. I didn't know what I was going to do with this book, but I kept working on it during that 6 weeks that I was home on leave. And by the end of that time, when I went back to work, I had this manuscript. And again, I didn't know what I was going to do with it because I never planned to write a book. But here we are all those years later. And Yesterday's Lies to this day is still my bestseller. It's the one that I've sold the most copies of. That series is, I don't think I could replicate. Like what I put into that was just something so unique. And I still have people that, talk about the Tony series, like you said, as you call it.
yeah, absolutely. And
Hmm.
don't worry, for those of you who are watching, I will have the links for you to get a copy of yourself because I have my copy, and it's really good. So just sit back and relax and enjoy. I love the part where you said you don't know where it came from; it just came to you,
Hmm.
and then you
It
just started
did.
typing. And you
Hmm.
hear that story a lot with writers, so that's
Yeah.
really interesting. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. All right, so number two. Your work often delves into complex emotional landscapes, particularly in Love, Lies, and Fight, which
Mm.
explores the intertwined journeys of a therapist and her client. How do you approach writing about such sensitive and deeply personal themes? And what do you hope readers take away from these stories?
Love, Lies, and Fight it was a journey. And it was a journey from a couple of perspectives. One, it was the first time I co-wrote anything with another author, and it was challenging. I have to be honest with you because I have my way of doing things and, they had their vision. So it was really challenging. But the backstory of that is a person that I had worked with, a coworker of mine had come to me and she wanted to write a book about it was very personal. It was actually something that happened in her life. And one of the ways that she felt she could work through that trauma was by writing about it. So she initially approached me and asked me if I would ghostwrite this book for her. And as we started to, at first I was like, well, I've never done that before, but I'm willing to give it a try. As we started working on it, it was very clear to me that she wanted the story to be told exactly the way she wanted it to be told. There was no room for any deviation other than the fact that we changed names, we changed the locations, we made it so it wasn't, somebody could come back and say, "Oh, that's about me."
Right.
Other than that, she was very particular and specific. So while wrestling with how to work on this thing together, I came up with the idea of let's have a therapist. I'll write the therapist role and you be the client. That way you can be the client and you can say whatever you want to say and express however you want to express it. But then I'm going to help you through the process. And so if you think about it, it really ties into I'm not a therapist yet. We'll talk about that later, but I am a life coach. So similar concepts are used when you're coaching someone, they come up with goals and you're trying to help them figure out how to reach those goals. So and we scheduled weekly sessions where we would get on, sometimes on the phone, sometimes on a Zoom call. This was during COVID, so everyone was on, lockdown. And we would just get together and she would she would write things and she did share some of her actual notes between her and her real therapist because again, during COVID, you weren't going to see them, it was all virtual visits and then they would share some emails. So some of that stuff that's in the book is actually real. Um, again, with some tweaks to names and time frames and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. So it was really it allowed me to use the things that I had learned through my life coaching certification, which I got like maybe 6 months to a year before I started working on this project with her. It allowed me to use some of those things to write, and so her sharing some of the therapist things with me helped as well. And I actually come from, I have several actual licensed therapists in my family. So it's kind of a family thing.
Wow.
um, so although not yet, I'm actually in school to do that. But yeah, it was difficult because of managing her process.
Hmm.
It was it for her to relive some of the details, some of the questions I'm answering. It was like a therapy session um, once a week, and some of the parts were very difficult for her to relive or to just kind of go through that and explain things again. So it was I was exhausted by the end, emotionally exhausted. Um,
Yeah.
she
It's
came
a
out on the other side, you know, good.
yeah. And as you're sharing that story, it's amazing to me to think about how, the universe has a way of putting things in along your journey to
Hmm.
help you connect the dots to your
Yes.
own life journey as well,
Yes.
And so that leads me to my next question.
Hmm.
That is, you've also shared your own experiences in love lessons,
Yes.
which is a very vulnerable and
Mm.
courageous step. What inspired you to open up about your personal love journey, and what kind of impact has sharing these stories had on you and your readers?
So what led me to writing love lessons is, I wrote a memoir called Passport Why when I met and then subsequently married my now ex-husband. And during that time, I was living in Dominican Republic for about 2 years, and I had a blog called Dominican Housewife Chronicles. And while I was over there, I started this blog, and I would at least once a week, I think I would put a post up, and I would, share things that I was learning about the culture. And it was just a very interesting time for me because, it was completely opposite of what I was accustomed to. So during that process, I actually gained a lot of followers and they were looking for, what happened. So fast forward to he finally got to the United States. It took us like 3.5 years. He got his visa, he got to the United States. And then I started some blogs about his journey getting there and how things were going. And then it abruptly stopped. So I stopped writing, I stopped blogging, and I actually ran into a woman that I had never met in the grocery store. And she was like, "Hey, you're that lady who
Mm.
married the guy and you're in the Dominican Republic. She was like, what happened? You just stopped. Like, we want to know. And I was like, oh, girl, it was it was a lot. And I was dealing with a lot because
Mm.
things, no spoiler alert, but things didn't end up, the way I had hoped. So, I felt that I needed to kind of finish the story based on my interaction with her. And then, I talked to some other people too, and they were like, yeah, I mean, I was so public with it in the beginning. So it wasn't like everything was private. And then I just kind of said, oh, I'm going to tell everybody my business. That relationship had been so public on social media. There were pictures and there were just all these things, the whole thing. So that's why I felt the need. Now, I will say, Christina, I think I wrote it too soon. I think if I had waited maybe even a year, it could have been not much different, but it could have been a little bit more in depth with my healing journey. So that's the only thing I'll say that, maybe I could have held off because there's so many things I could add. And I could still, I could
Yeah.
do, part two, or I could just, do another version of it. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there. And as far as the readers, I mean, I've gotten a positive response. Many people, I've had people buy multiple copies because they want to share it with their sons, their daughters, people giving it to people for wedding gifts or, as they are getting into these relationships or divorces as people are, going through divorces and things like that. So it's become a tool. And it actually, I made one of my guided journals. There's a couples journal that kind of goes with it because that's kind of, some of the things I talk about in there, the key topics, communication and talking about roles and just there's so many things that can go very wrong if you don't have the tough conversations in the beginning.
Reading that, and I have that book too.
Hmm.
For me, it brought home when you talked about maybe you should have waited. For me, the way I see it is, things happen, Terry, when they're supposed to, you
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
And I saw that as you taking a situation that so many of us have been through in some way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. And, where so many of us can get down on ourselves or blame ourselves or, just feel like a victim. You
Hmm.
took that and turned it up on its head, and you were completely vulnerable about it,
Hmm.
wrote about it, which is what you tell people to do.
Yeah.
And it helped to heal you and also helped heal so many others who understand that they're not alone when they go through these things.
Right.
And I just really appreciated you and admire your courage for putting that out there.
Hmm.
Because I was following those blogs too.
Hmm.
Um, but thank you for sharing that process and what you were going through. And thank you for putting that book out there. And so if you haven't read it, you guys need to see it. So, all right, number four, that's called Lessons in Love. All right, number four, beyond your writing, you've
Hmm.
also dedicated yourself to giving back through your nonprofit, A Blessing for You. Can
Yes.
you tell us more about the inspiration behind this nonprofit and how it aligns with your overall mission of helping others? You are the most compassionate person I know. So tell us about how that got started.
So, I worked for a health insurance company for almost 30 years, and in 2017, I had an opportunity to take an early retirement. They were doing some major restructuring and, you know, those of us with the tenure and age, we could take this early retirement package. So I decided to do that. And while I was going through that process of trying to figure out what I was going to do next in my life, I kept coming to, what is it you want to do? And it always comes back to help people, help people. So how do I help people? And really, at the time, I had some friends or close family members, and then also my family. We have a family business called Life Esteem, and we did a lot of parenting programs, and we were interacting with people that were just really going through different things in their life. And one of the themes that I started to see was there are all these agencies out there. You can go to the diaper bank and get diapers, and you can go to this place and get that, but there was nobody bringing it all together. There was nobody trying to provide training programs or trying to get these young mothers to really evaluate their situation. Like, how do we get here and how do we move forward? So
Mm.
because of all the different things that, you've mentioned, I decided that I wanted to create a blessing for you as a way to connect with these families. And it's not always women. There are some single dads out there too, for whatever reason, and sometimes they need help. So, I started off thinking only focusing on the women, but quickly it became clear to me that there are also some young men out there that also need some guidance and direction. So, my thought process was, at some point when I was raising my kids, I was a single mom during the worst part when they were teenagers. But I remember thinking about how I made it through that by having like a network of people that and they weren't necessarily all single mothers, but in my neighborhood, people that their kids went to the same schools, how could we help each other out? So the initial thing was to help women get the supplies they need, the things they need for their baby, because, you have a baby, some people have a baby shower, some people can't afford a baby shower. You get things, but how to connect them with other parents so that they could share resources so that they could share experiences. And one of the best things that came out of that vision, or the vision I had, was creating something where we would do what we call mom swaps. When you have young children, they go through clothes and supplies and everything
Right.
so quickly. So a lot of those things can be reused and they're in really good shape. So we created a mom swap where, people register, you tell us what stuff you have. Maybe your child is 9 months old and you have clothes, smaller infant clothes that you can donate, and then you need, maybe 9 or 12 month clothes. So we pair you up with someone that you can give their child, what you have, and then you get the stuff from them, but creating a network where the moms could do that. And it worked out really. Now, our first mom swap was literally 2 weeks before they shut us down in 2020. Um, so we couldn't have an in-person mom swap for several years, but what it did is those moms that were a part of that initial one, they were so inspired by it. I mean, I had to rent two storage spaces to hold all the stuff that I was getting from these moms because they wanted to give back. They felt so inspired and so appreciative of what they had received, that at the end of it, they wanted to give back. And we're still getting, people calling us to donate things, to the point where I have to turn some people away. People are trying to give us car seats and strollers and cribs and changing tables, and I just can't, you know, store all of those things right now. So that's kind of how it all came about.
I do you have Instagram?
I
Are
do.
you on Instagram? Okay,
Yes.
so I think I follow you. I've seen it on Facebook or Instagram. I think it was like a around Christmas time or something, and you put a video clip out there and you
Hmm.
were showing all these baby clothes and toys. I think it was for
Yeah.
Christmas
Yes.
that you were like, come on down. These
Yes.
are all free. Get them while they
Yes.
last. And I was just so
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah. We had
I don't
a
have no baby no more, but still,
listen,
I was
we
excited.
had we had I mean, a lot. We had adult clothes. We had the last mom swap that we had end of last year. We had so much stuff. Like I said, people, it's no longer about infants. It started off being, if you have a child that's 2 years old or younger, it has grown beyond that because families are, donating things to us all the time. And we have here in the Harrisburg area, we've partnered with some of the local community health centers, and there are social workers that work there that know about what we do, and they'll refer people to us. Or if something happens, if there's a fire or something like that, they may come. The Red Cross is always there, right? But they know that we specialize in those types of things, so they'll contact us and see what we have available as well.
Thank you so much for being you. Um, this is just great. Okay, next question. Um, as a certified life coach,
Mhm.
you use guided journals as a tool for personal growth.
Yes.
And I vividly remember when we first met, my time when I was your alma mater's director of parent and alumni relations.
Hmm.
And remember that time we had dinner? We met for dinner
Yes.
for hours
Hmm.
and discussed your desire. Remember this, Terry?
I
To
do.
pay it
I do.
forward
Hmm.
to a school that you deeply loved.
Hmm.
And that led us to setting up a journal writing workshop for
Hmm.
freshmen
Yep.
during orientation and also a professional development workshop for the development office.
Yes.
The overwhelmingly positive response from both groups was
Hmm.
so impressive, and I was
Yep.
struck by how masterfully you engage with both students and adults.
Hmm.
So the question is, do you find the practice of journal writing healing? If so, how? And how does this practice complement your writing? And what key principles do you emphasize when helping clients connect the dots in their lives? That's a lot, but just say what's on your mind.
So, wait, I wanted to address the first part of that question. Hold on. I have it here too. Um, so I
Do you
find
find
it very healing. I find it very healing, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I literally have my diaries back to when I was that 10-year-old. I mean, they might be in storage, but I have boxes of journals that I've kept over, the course of my life. And the reason I find it so healing is because the actual process of writing your feelings down, it feels good when you can, you know, get that out. But for me, I spend time going back and reading things that I've written. And it is, I can laugh, I can cry, I can, and that's, through the Tony series, Tony journals. And so I've specifically included that in as a part of her character because I have found it to be such a good healing thing for me. And during the when I wrote that first book, Yesterday's Lies, I did a lot of book clubs meetings. And I remember specifically this group of women, it was at a retirement home in Baltimore, and they talked to me about how that piece resonated with them so vividly because when their mom passed, they spent like a long weekend. They found her journals and they spent this long weekend reading. And one sister was like, it was heartbreaking. And the other sister was like, it just filled her with so much joy. So there were all these emotions, but they learned things about their mother after she passed that they had no idea, that it answered questions for them. So that actually, because I had stopped journaling for a period of time because my second husband, he accessed my journals and I felt just, you know,
violating?
violated. And so for a few years, I didn't write because I was like, how could you get in? Not only did he read it, but he like made photocopies of it and like shared it with my mom and other people in my family. So I
Wow.
yeah, it was bad. I felt very violated. So I was afraid. to continue writing my thoughts down because sometimes you're like, if I write that and somebody reads it, then what? So that conversation with those three women helped kind of get me back into wanting to do this and wanting to write because I would like for my kids to have a better understanding of the things I was feeling and going through when they were coming up and even now. Like the stuff I write now, I can't wait for them to read it. I can't wait for them to read how the things that we're going through now affect me because I don't think they have a clue,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Thank you for sharing that. And I remember thinking that another part of the question was talking about how you so masterfully navigated the experience with the freshmen,
Mm,
the little ninth graders, and then also with adults. And I
yeah.
remember when you were doing the journal writing professional development with our team,
Hmm.
we had a small group, but we were all so very diverse. You
Hmm.
had some who were like so excited, can't wait to do this, and then you had some who were like, I'm not talking about my feelings.
Right,
Um,
right. And that's the
yeah.
thing,
And I was
that
watching you to see
hmm
how you navigated that,
right.
and you were like, you ain't worried about it because you knew that once they started writing,
Hmm.
that they would get into it, in which they did. And so we so appreciated that, the workshop that you did. We were talking about it for a while afterwards, and I hope that you will continue to do that with your alma mater.
And
So,
that whole workshop, um, you know, was the reason I created that first guided journal. Pulling the information together, and I thought the best
hmm,
way would be to give, the girls something that they could, take away with them, not just some papers, stapled together or in a folder like a real book. And one of the things that I still want to do is I'd like to make that, I like spiral bound. I just prefer that because you can fold, you can flip it out. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
really want to get that the format of that updated to a spiral bound. But that was my first guided journal. Um, but you're right. I'm often met with even just real quick to talk about the life coaching piece and how I can kind of fold that in. Everybody doesn't want to write. Everybody doesn't want to write their feelings. It's not something that everyone will embrace, but the guided journals help because it's really you just answering questions. And the thing that I tell people all the time is any of those questions or prompts that are not comfortable for you, don't do it. Move on to the next. And normally you can find at least one thing that you feel a little comfortable talking about or writing about. In that whole book, you can find one thing. And the point of it is just to get them to see the benefit of putting those, feeling either talking. Some clients I have, they don't want to write it, but they'll talk about it, which is, just as good. It is.
right, right. That was that made me think of my daughter, who
Hmm.
is she's an only child too,
Mm.
and she doesn't like to write, but she's starting to write now, but she used to on her phone record her
Yes,
thoughts.
I would do that
And
too. I do that too. Yeah. So I have journals, I have voice recordings. Now, I make videos. Sometimes I will share them on social media. Sometimes I have videos. I started making videos on my computer, and there's some of them on my YouTube channel of things that I just want to remember. I started one about my Chatham experience and all of the different ways that I feel it has touched my life. Like even now, how that experience has it was, I don't know what my life would have been like if I hadn't had that experience. I'll say it that way. So Yeah, very impactful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yep.
Okay, last question. Terri, you have accomplished so much from publishing multiple books to founding a nonprofit and becoming a life coach. You helped and guided me as I was writing my first book. So patient. And I want to thank you, my friend.
Oh,
Your support meant a lot to me.
mhm.
What advice do you have for aspiring writers and individuals who are looking to make a meaningful impact in their communities? And what are you working on now?
Actually, right now, I am working on finishing school. I haven't, the last book that I worked on personally for me was Love Lessons. And since then, I have published some other, mainly poets. I don't know, they seem to flock to me for some reason. I haven't done any novels. I think the last novel I did was Love Lies and no, I've done one since then. But anyway, mainly poets find me and I help them with their poetry. But um, really school and I'm finished. So I have my life coaching certification, which is great. But one of the things I will tell you, especially since through COVID, a lot of people would find me and they don't need a life coach. They really needed a therapist or a counselor. I don't have the credentials to do that. So I am on this journey. I am literally 13 credits away from at least my initial degree. Now, with therapists and all that, you really kind of need to go into, masters and doctorates and all that. But listen, I'm on that journey. So that's kind of been my focus. I will say that I have been working on at a very slow pace a follow-up to Love, Lies, and Fight. Joy is the therapist from that book, and the book will be called Finding Joy. And it's kind of a play on the word because it's really more about you finding your joy after something. A lot of times it's not necessarily divorce, but it could literally be your kids are out of the house, empty nest syndrome, but finding yourself after you've lost yourself. And it happens a lot. We lose
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be the next thing you see from me, will be finding joy.
Wow. So exciting. I can't wait for that. I can't wait for that. What about advice that you have for people who are aspiring writers?
And not only I don't just publish, I mean, just like you shared, I helped you get your book published. So, the things I just like helping people. You mentioned that at the beginning. So it's
Mhm.
not about, I'm not trying to be this, big publisher and I'm not trying to get rich off of that. I really just like helping people. So I will, when people come to me, they have an idea, I say, okay. I can show you how to do this. I mean, I've taught people how to help mentor them through the process of doing their own books, whatever platform they want to use. I'm not going to, pitch one or the other, but there's several ways you can go with, self-publishing. Um, so when people come to me, I say do it. If they say I have an idea, I'm like, do it. Well, how do I start? I'm like, you literally just start writing. But don't I need an outline and don't I need, just start writing? It has to be edited anyway, so you
Right.
can work all of that stuff out later. Now, one thing I do know, and I will say, people are different. Like for me, I mentioned at the beginning, this idea came to me and I just kind of ran with it. I'm not the kind of writer that some authors or even poets, they set a schedule. I'm going to write X number of words this day, and I'm going to write. That's not me. It flows, it comes to me as it comes to me. I could never write on a schedule, but some people need that. So I kind of meet people where they are. If it's a person that needs that, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, then that's the schedule I'll set up for them and I can work with that. If they're more like, well, it's just kind of, I can work with that too. But I just say, just start writing. And for people that don't feel comfortable with the writing part, just start recording yourself telling the story, because that's the beginning. Anybody can transcribe that for you. Just start telling the story. So that's usually, the advice I give. And I'll also tell people, and I don't know if you want to share any of your experience, but the writing is the easiest part. Writing the story is the easiest part. Getting it out to people is the hardest part. Really marketing it and getting the sales. And I'm still have a day job. So clearly, even though I've sold a lot of books. I've given books away, but I've sold a lot of books. But not enough for it to be the only thing I can do. But for me, it's not about that. It's never been about that. It's about helping people through whatever they're going through in their lives. So,
I so resonate with that. The writing is fun and it's easy and it flows.
hmm
Once you, like you said, once you get started, you know, once I got started, there was no stopping me.
hmm
But it's that nitty gritty, tedious editing. And
yes.
remember, we kept going back and forth. I was like, how do you put this damn cover on, the
Yes.
whatever the spine or whatever it was.
hmm
I didn't know how to do
Yep.
that. That
Yep.
kind of stuff will drive you crazy. But
hmm
when you think about the big picture, it's all worth it. It's all worth it because you are the work that you're doing is not only helping to heal you,
hmm
but to help heal others. And you're spreading joy and love. And
hmm
I love and honor the spirit I see before me, Terri. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
taking time out of your busy schedule. You do so much to sit and chat with us. And thank you to all of the listeners who were listening. And you can find her on the show notes that I will leave for you. So thank you, Terri,
Thank you
and
for
have
having
a
me.
great day. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Looking forward to it.
Bye bye. Love and
Bye.
light to all.